Sometimes you see a single bizarre clip online and it just sends you down a rabbit hole you never ever expected. It all started for me with this one really strange interview with a televangelist, and before I knew it, I had uncovered this entire unbelievable world. So let's dive in, because it all kicked off with one man, a journalist, and a very pointed question. So this is it. This is the moment that starts the whole thing. A journalist corners televangelist Kenneth Copeland asking him why he flies on a private jet. And his response? You don't want to get into a tube with a bunch of demons. Now, he did later say he meant spiritual demons, not, actual people. But the justification is just so out there it makes you ask the obvious question. And this is where the story really gets going. See, it's not just one jet. Kenneth Copeland, a preacher who's reportedly worth hundreds of millions of dollars, owns a fleet of jets. He's got a $7 million mansion and his own private airport. I mean, we're way beyond simple travel preferences here. This is a level of wealth that just seems completely at odds with the image of a typical religious leader, right? So how on earth is this possible? How do you justify this kind of opulence? Well, to understand the jets and the mansions, we have to first get our heads around the belief system that pays for it all. And it's a system that completely flips the script on the relationship between faith and money. And get this, Copeland is not an outlier here. He's part of a whole world of these ultra-wealthy pastors. You've got Jesse Duplantis, who's right there next to Copeland justifying his own jet. You've got Joel Osteen, a New York Times best-selling author whose services attract huge celebrities. And then there's Creflo Dollar, who actually fundraised for his own private jet and whose ministry owns 2 Rolls-Royces. And this is how they do it. They basically reinterpret religious texts to support their lifestyle. This quote right here is a perfect example. It just completely challenges that common idea of a humble carpenter and instead reframes Jesus and his apostles as wealthy, successful businessmen. It's this foundational shift in thinking that makes everything else possible. This whole belief system has a name, the prosperity gospel. And the core idea, it's actually pretty simple, and you can see why it's so appealing. God doesn't just, tolerate wealth. He actively wants you to be prosperous. He wants you to be rich, healthy, successful. These aren't just lucky breaks. They are your divine right, and you can get them through faith. And if you think that's a big idea, it goes even further. Believers are taught that they are, essentially, little gods. The teaching says that because humans are made in God's image, they have a piece of divine DNA inside them. And this gives them the power to literally speak their own reality, their own wealth and health into existence. It's a message of ultimate, almost cosmic empowerment. Okay, so if you've got this divine power, how do you unlock it, right? How do you actually get access to all this promised prosperity? Well, there's a very specific mechanism for that, and it's called sowing a seed. The whole thing is presented as this really straightforward cycle. Step 1, you sow a seed, which means you donate money to the ministry. Step 2, you stay in faith, believing without a doubt that a reward is coming your way. And finally, step 3, you reap the harvest, where God supposedly multiplies your donation, sometimes 100-fold, and sends it back to you as cash or even as a physical healing. It basically turns giving into a kind of spiritual investment. And we're not always talking about a vague request for, 10% of your income. Sometimes it gets incredibly specific. During a broadcast, a preacher might ask for a very precise amount, like this one, $1,144. They'll link that specific seed to specific promised harvest, like, say, a family member being freed from addiction. Listen to this. Here, Creflo Dollar isn't just asking his congregation for a $65 million private jet. No, he's framing it as an act of his own faith. It's a dream he is believing God for. And honestly, the most shocking part, the original reports say the congregation responded with cheers and applause. And that right there brings us to the absolute key to all of this. The Rolls-Royce, the private jet, the mansion. In this world, those things aren't seen as hypocritical. They are the ultimate advertisement. The preacher's wealth is held up as proof that the system works. He's not just teaching it, he's living it. His lifestyle is the feature, not the bug. But the promises aren't just about money. They extend to your physical health, which leads us into a deeply controversial part of this world, faith healing, and these huge events called miracle crusades. So one of the most famous figures in this arena is a preacher named Benny Hinn. And this guy fills entire stadiums for what he calls miracle crusades. You have people with all kinds of illnesses coming to the stage, and with just a touch of his hand, he claims to channel God's healing power, causing them to fall to the ground, supposedly cured. But are we really watching actual miracles here? For an answer, maybe we should turn to an insider, Benny Hinn's own nephew, Costi Hinn. He worked inside the ministry for years before coming forward to talk about what he saw. He says the job was, basically, to sell the narrative, to project this perfect image of being blessed, to convince followers that if they just gave money and obeyed, God would do the same for them. Well, investigative documentaries have suggested there's a system at play. At these big crusades, people they call screeners reportedly filter the audience. So those with less visible problems, or people who just seem really highly suggestible, they might get on stage. But people with severe visible conditions, like an 8-year-old girl named Grace or a man named Justin Peters with cerebral palsy, were reportedly stopped and turned away. So what is actually happening up on that stage? On the one hand, you have the claim, supernatural, divine healing power. But on the other hand, there's a really compelling argument that what's actually at work is a powerful set of psychological techniques that can create a profound, real-feeling experience without any miracle at all. Okay, let's break down these techniques. It starts with the atmosphere, the lights, the music, the massive energy of the crowd. It all works to create this hypnotic, highly suggestible state. Then there's expectancy. The audience is told again and again a miracle is about to happen. The healer is like a conductor, using the power of suggestion. Meanwhile, social conformity pressures people to go along with what everyone else is doing. And finally, you have the placebo effect, which is a well-documented scientific phenomenon where a person's belief can trigger real, though often temporary, changes in their body. Now, the power of belief is undeniable. But what happens when the music fades and the adrenaline wears off and the promised healing doesn't last? What is the cost for those people whose faith and money don't deliver the miracle they were promised? This is the story of Ashnell. He was a 10-year-old boy with 2 brain tumors. His family, completely desperate, brought him on stage at a Benny Hinn event, and a supposed miracle was performed. But days later, nothing had changed. And yet, his father's faith was so strong that he donated another $2,000 to the ministry. 7 weeks after that crusade, Ashnell passed away. And this is the truly tragic part of the system. Because when the healing fails, the blame gets turned inward, onto the believer. When Ashnell's father was asked if he ever felt like he did something wrong to deserve this, he said yes. He talks about a generational curse, an idea he heard from the ministry. So the failure isn't the preacher's, it's theirs. Their faith just wasn't strong enough. You'd think that stories like Ashnell's would bring this whole movement to a halt. But despite widespread criticism, the prosperity gospel isn't shrinking. It's actually a booming business, exported from the US to Africa, Asia, and all over the world, promising wealth to some of the poorest people on the planet. I mean, some of the largest churches in the entire world are now in Nigeria, and many of them preach a version of this same gospel. Ultimately, after all of this explainer isn't about telling anyone what to believe. It's about looking at a really powerful phenomenon and trying to understand the mechanics behind it. And it leaves us with what might be the most important question we can ever ask ourselves whenever we're faced with a powerful, persuasive message that promises us everything we've ever wanted. It's a question that invites a